All right. We had a little bit of technical difficulty. Thank you for all who signed in and messaged us to let us know that while we were having a great conversation, it wasn't going anywhere. So let's do this again. Not the first time we've had to restart some of these
I
experiences.
hate it
So
when my best work is
yeah,
not.
yeah. Michael had the most insightful words to share, and it's all downhill from there. So welcome back, or welcome to the first in a series of discussions, online panel discussions, sometimes live, where we're exploring neurocognitive training and mental skills training, mostly in sport, but also in the broader applications for just human performance. My name is Noah Rolland. I am the CEO of NeuroTrainer, a neurocognitive training and measurement company. But more importantly, I'm just really here to facilitate conversation because I'm joined today by two wonderful guests. So Michael Rabasca, who will preserve some of his insights for us. Michael is the director of cognitive performance at the LA Galaxy. We've known each other a couple years. They've been using our technology, but he also uses other technology to really be able to tap into this whole concept of cognitive training to improve professional athletes, as well as, and I think it's worth noting, younger athletes who are not on the team, right, who are in the academy and are working their way up. So Michael brings years of experience of really taking these ideas and taking them out into the field, making them work not only for athletes, but then a whole nother part of the job that we'll hopefully get into a little bit is you still got to sell everybody else, right? You have to get buy-in from athletes, you have to get buy-in from coaches, and it's a whole process in order for it to work. Also joined by Tommy Wood. Tommy is an MD and has a PhD in neuroscience. He is an associate professor at the University of Washington, and a man of many different hats and many different cognitive passions, might I say. Well, his day job is looking at brain trauma and simulated by using really ferrets and exploring neonatal cognitive health. He has the ability to also work in a very broad range, and that allows him to study cognitive behavior and cognitive health really from birth all the way to death. Works on several different Alzheimer's and dementia um, boards as an advisor, and also very active in sport, as you can tell, an athlete himself, sometimes a strongman competitor. We'll have to talk about that later. But also is the head of science for Hinsa Performance and in their work with Formula One. So great to have you both here. We're going to really dig into this whole conversation around, I think people get confused. What is cognitive training? And it's sometimes a very hot topic. I think people want to incorporate it into their teams, but they need to know, why am I doing it? What am I going to get out of it? How long am I going to have to do this? It is, we will often say, it's the final 1%, right? That's what we believe. We know a lot about human performance from the neck down. We don't really know that much yet about human performance from the neck up. Tommy may say we do, but I would say in the field we don't. And so we're trying to figure out how to bridge that gap. So welcome, both of you.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thank you very much.
So let's start off with that first question. Again, let's define it. What is cognitive performance?
Yeah, I'll start, and what I will say is, Tommy and I do have something similar in our backgrounds, or at least my academic background was in occupational therapy, so kind of a psych science background, and Um, after I graduated, spent years in Phoenix, Arizona, working for Barrows Neurological Institute and St. Joseph's Hospital. And I went all in on neurological disorders. Started with spinal
Mm,
cord, went on to traumatic brain injury, stroke, acquired neurological injuries, and gave me the strong base, the strong background of why it's important um, to have cognitive training
mm.
or to help with recovery.
Yeah, that's great framework. Yeah.
All along the way, I'm coaching soccer, and there's kind of a aha moment after about 20 years. I say that with a lot of embarrassment, that it took 20 years to kind of come to the conclusion that you don't have to have a damaged brain to be working on your brain.
To benefit from brain training.
Yeah,
Yeah.
prepare for brain. So here I am each and every day, knowing how difficult it is to get through these traumatic brain injuries, to rehab, etc. But when it came to my athletes, I really wasn't giving them the same, I
Mm,
was using same techniques.
mm.
I just wasn't calling it rehab, or I wasn't calling it, performance.
Right.
So some way the best, yeah, as soon as I started putting some labels and some framework around this for the athletes, um, I found there was great benefit to what we were doing. And it stands to reason for me still that if we're doing it to help those who are suffering or in those neurological conditions, it stands to reason that a normal, healthy, athletic brain could also learn some skills that would enhance their.
Sure. Sure. I would also say intuitively, and I think most people get this. I know if I train my body, it's going to enhance my performance. And some of that is very linear and some of it's not, right? I'm going to improve my 1 rep max on a bench press. Is that really going to make me a better soccer player? Well, maybe not, but there are benefits and we could sort of explore those larger benefits. So the idea that if I train my brain the same way I train my body, not necessarily using the same techniques, but some of the same principles, that it will improve, the top end, my capacity. I think that's right. But let's define it. So
Yeah. Yeah. For me, it's more on the neuroscience end. We definitely have an appreciation. I have an appreciation for sports psych and mental skills.
mhm,
But I'm trying to find the 2 to 5% in things that we can measure, whether that be in vision, visual processing, reaction time, to the extent that I can find activities, tools that hit at those areas. We're going to hit executive cognitive function. Um, we're going to hit a lot of things, but primarily we we want to see the data. We want to see things that come back. And again, while I appreciate sports psych, goal setting, and um, grit and mindset, and all these constructs that definitely have value, um, when it comes to the athletes I work with, we try and stay toward. I don't want to. I use the word hard science, and some people may get offended by that, but we stick to the neuroscience.
well, we're going to try to offend a lot of people on
Yeah,
this.
we try and stick to the neuroscience end of the world.
So I'm gonna feed that back to some extent.
Yeah,
We all recognize the value of mental skills, and it's a rich history, and we've talked about the benefits of being clear on your goals, being clear on your tensions, your belief systems. In your domain, you're looking for things that are a little bit more hard coded and measurable. And then and I don't know that we'll get very deep in it today, but I know you're always working on how do we then take that data and apply that data to the data we're collecting in game
yeah,
so that there's some sort of correlation. Is that
yeah,
right?
yeah. I think that's right. I mean, in my department, we have a framework where we have 8 structures. I happen to be responsible for 3 of the structures, which is personality, emotion, and cognition.
Mm.
Emotion is your ability to understand what's going on in your body. So, quick is the butterflies in your stomach.
Hmm.
This might be a nervous response of some
Hmm.
sort. That's going to impact your thinking, going to impact the cognitive side. But that's an area that I say probably runs closer to sports psych and mental skills training. And personality at the Galaxy, we look for 4 specific personality traits: being driven, competitor, emotional regulator, and I'll forget the fourth. But all of these play into um, our thinking and our actual doing.
Hmm.
And so I think it's important. I think you've hit on it. The next frontier for me, and I work kind of day and night on
Right.
this, is how do I know that the cognitive skills are being presented in the game?
Right.
And how is that? We know that we have all the physical measurements. You can run 40 meters in
Right.
this amount of time and the number of high speed bouts you get, right? But we don't exactly know um, what went into the decision to play the ball back instead of forward.
Right.
And I still am looking at I try to look at all these in game statistics with some other tools to try and figure out, can we get to a cognitive statistic that starts to quantify how well they're seeing the game, how well they're making these decisions, how well they're reacting.
Okay. Tommy, give us a broader sense of cognitive training, cognitive performance.
Yeah, I think of cognitive performance probably because of all those different areas you mentioned, thinking about the developing brain through to the end of life and brain trauma, as well as elite performance in between. I think of cognitive performance as having a brain that does what you want it to do when you want it to do it. Um, and there are a huge number of components that go into that, including physical health and psychology, as well as the basic function of the machinery in your skull. And I do think it stands to reason that, when you look at almost any tissue in the body, its function is determined by the stimulus or the demands that are placed upon it. So that's your heart in terms of cardiovascular fitness when you go running. It's your muscles when you do strength training. It's your liver when you drink a lot of alcohol. It gets better at metabolizing alcohol. It's your bones when you load them. It's your immune system when you get exposed to a virus or a vaccine, right? It gets stronger. It gets better at dealing with them. And the brain is essentially the same. If we can apply specific stimuli, we can then train specific functions. A lot of that does come from just our day-to-day experiences and how we interact with the world. So when I think about working with elite level motorsports drivers, is there something that I can do to train processing speed and reaction time beyond what they get in a car driving at a wall at 200 plus miles an hour? I'm not sure, actually, right? There's already all those processes are being trained.
All right. So here's the raw truth,
level,
right?
Yeah.
But I think that's part of this conversation is I don't think any of us are standing on a pedestal saying we absolutely 100% know what exactly the benefits of this will be. I think that was a great framework, a great construct. We know that the body responds to stress, right? And if you measure that stress and you apply that stress correctly, you can get great benefits. And if there's too much stress, you can get to overwhelm. So you bring up one of the really important questions, which is, do I need to do something else or do I just drive the car, right? Do I need to do something in a VR headset? Do I need to do something on a touch screen or do I just get more reps in the field?
I think there's multiple parts to it. So one, especially during athlete development, there's a ton that you can do to train specific and non-specific skills in multiple ways. I think equally at the very top levels of performance, it may be, right, I can't improve reaction time anymore, right? Max Verstappen's reaction time is what it is.
Right.
Should they ask me to try and help them improve it? There's nowhere to go.
Hard pass.
Right.
Yeah, right.
But it could be that, athletes even at that level, by engaging in certain training processes, you bring in more of the psychology, right? I am doing everything, right? I have ticked every single box. I am using every technology and everything available to me. And then that increases confidence and belief that you're at the top of your game.
Right.
So I think there's multiple. Yes, I think depending on where you are in that development curve, there's a ton that you can do in terms of training. And then additionally, later in life, it probably becomes even more important.
Right.
But even then, regardless of where you are, I think there's a number of other potential benefits depending on how you kind of sell it and use it.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting points. So let's dig a little bit deeper. Let's assume that the people who are joining us today, obviously this is a self-selected audience. You don't join a cognitive training webinar because you have no interest in cognitive training. So what we want to do is really dig into this question of, okay, I'm interested, what do I do and what can I expect? So common questions that surface in my day-to-day life. One of them would be, okay, how much time do we have to put into this? Which I find, I have my own answer because I've been doing this for a while, but I find is really interesting because I've never worked with a coach or a high-level athlete or somebody within the DoD or even an executive who's ever come to me in a conversation and said, I just have so much downtime and I'm just looking for something to do, can this fill that gap? It's always, my plate is full, constantly sacrificing. You're talking about now adding another training domain. So let's get realistic in terms of what do I need to put in order to get something reasonable out?
Yeah, I can take this one, I suppose. We have a framework which is to activate the system and then to build on the system. So for us, our activation is typically 8 to 12 minutes in the morning before they go out to training. There might be two reasons why we want that system activated. One is maybe a learning scenario. So a typical example might be they're going into a video session.
Mhm.
And we really want them awake, alert. It's probably no mystery that young players come in tired at the beginning of the day. We've tried.
Because we never do.
We never
Yeah,
do.
I never show up
I'm
tired.
always ready
Yeah.
to go without my cup of coffee. So we've actually tried to quantify this, and we've had players come in and we ask them 2 questions: their sleepiness, scale of 1 to 5, and then their readiness to actually play in a game, not a practice. Readiness to play in a game, 1 through 5. We get that number before and then after the cognitive training. We ask the same numbers, and we see these engagement scores go
You see
up.
both of them go up,
We
right?
see both
Yeah,
of them go up
consistently.
consistently across the board. And this was used exclusively with NeuroTrainer, but we've done it with we're doing it with other systems as well. So either for the learning situation or just to be ready to go out onto the field.
Right.
And we have a healthy roster of players who will also do that activation before going on to the warm up.
Right. The physical warm
The
up.
physical warm up for match play.
Mm-hmm.
We also have the building portion of it. Our building portion, the task we're prescribing anywhere from 15 to 25 minutes after a training session, which can be very difficult for players because they've already gone through a training session.
Right.
In some cases, they've gone through the training session, then they've gone to the gym, and now we're asking them to come back in to.
Right. So they have physical fatigue, physical load, and now you're asking them to do a cognitive task.
Right. And we're asking them to do that 2 to 3 times a week.
Okay. So you're doing pre-activation, or we'll call it priming. You call it activation.
Activation. Yeah.
7-8 minutes, 3 times a week, and then longer sessions for more of the build.
Yeah.
Okay.
And our I should also say I feel like we're well integrated on our team, because even after our activation inside the gym, that's inside my lab, if you will,
Mhm.
we have activation exercises built into our practice session. And these are
Sure.
run by the head coach, by the assistant coaches, and they're generally geared toward the theme of the practice.
Right.
But I guess what I'm trying to really impress is that the cognitive performance is built in to our team dynamic. So it's not something we just, like in the gym, go and do.
Yeah.
And then we're done.
It's not an add-on.
It's part of the
Yeah.
equation. So just like the sports science department, if it's a speed or strength day, typically the training sessions reflect a speed or strength day.
Right.
And we're in the same boat.
Okay.
It's that well integrated.
Same question, Tommy.
I would answer it coming from a slightly different direction, but would end up in the same place in terms of the answer. If you look at now, there are decades of studies using both just looking at humans learning broadly, and then also looking at cognitive training specifically. And I think that most studies where you can see a measurable improvement in some aspect of cognitive function, either directly related to the thing you're training, or maybe there's performance in sort of
Adjacent.
similar or adjacent cognitive functions, then it's something like 20 to 45 minutes, 2 to 3 times a week. That seems to be a sweet spot in multiple ways. The first is that most humans can only really focus on something, like truly focus on something, for like 20 to 30 minutes. If you go longer than that, you could do 60 to 90 minutes, but you're probably going to have some short breaks in there in between. And then and this is especially if you're sort of like pushing at the edges of your current capacity.
Right.
And then if you look at how you get the most out of any individual training session, if you learn every 2 to 3 days, you like maximize the amount that you get from each session. So you can learn faster if you do it more frequently, but you get slightly less from each session because you have
a law of diminishing returns.
Yeah, there's a law of diminishing returns. Actually, you haven't completely gotten the most out of the previous session, because a night or two of sleep, you consolidate better, you're ready to come back and attack it again. So something like 2 to 3 sessions a week, that like a similar length seems to be, if this is not all that you're going to do, right? That you're just trying to fitting it around other things. 20 to 30 minutes, 2 or 3 times a week is probably going to be a sweet spot for most people.
Okay. I think that's really helpful. And we're skirting around slightly, and we're not doing this deliberately, but we're skirting around now the difference between priming or activation, where we're looking to change your brain state and potentially your neurochemical state right now, right?
Mm.
So we know it's very popular in the military, and I think it's becoming increasingly interesting topic for people about this idea of priming, short periods.
Mm.
The longer periods are related to the concept of neuroplasticity, though, right?
Mm.
So let's unpack that a little bit. So part of the reason to do some of this cognitive work, as I see it, is to push somebody into a neuroplastic state, right? It's not what they're doing in the cognitive training, it's what the learning effect or the learning objective is after.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Is that tracking?
Yeah, I mean, it's the most frustrating part, because it is the piece that takes the longest to see a benefit.
Mm.
And when we're talking with athletes, really being able to give them a test to say, here's where you were at the start,
Right.
and then after 100 hours, uh, here's your performance here. Doing that on a consistent basis is really difficult in a professional training environment where you just got to get out and you got to practice, and here are the things.
Right. There's all these other things you have to do. Yeah.
But that 2 to 5%, I feel the players are moving in the right direction. The players themselves, anecdotally, subjectively, will say, I'm feeling sharper. I feel like I'm playing the ball quicker. I feel like I'm seeing more, whether it's placebo, whether it's the confidence game, or whether it is the actual
Intervention.
the neurology coming out, if you will. That's difficult, and it's the frustrating part for the player. When you're lifting a weight, all of a sudden you can tell you're now stronger because you're doing 5 pounds more. But when you're on the field and you're now playing a ball quicker and keeping possession better, well, that's because of their natural brilliance on the day, and not necessarily that they've been training in cognitive training for X number of hours. And that's one of the things we have to keep on pushing to the players. Well, you've been in the system now.
You have to remind them. Yeah.
Constantly.
Yeah. So we talk about that. We talk about when people ask how long before we really see results, which is, again, it's a squishy conversation. We will often say we will measure that in hundreds of minutes, not tens of minutes.
Mm-hmm.
If we're really going to start getting to a place where people start to say things like the game is slowing down. So we'll often position that as the ultimate evidence point is when your players start saying, okay, the game is slowing down, or the equivalent in racing must be the track is slowing down. I don't know, right? But this idea that we're speeding up some of the cognitive processes that make reality feel almost more matrix-like. So it's an interesting, for anybody who's thinking about implementing a cognitive program, this idea of having short-term wins and then also long-term metrics feels important. Does that sound right?
In my environment, we are weary of doing cognitive tests that have scores to them. That's the day-to-day thing, because it's almost like learning the test, if you will. Like you're going to get better if you keep on, you're in VR and you keep on doing this, you're going to get better at VR. That's why video games are so fantastic, right? You're always leveling up.
Right.
And you can go back a level and you're going to be still pretty good on it and move forward. For us, we have a battery of tests that we try and get out at the beginning of the season. Everything from vision, visual processing, visual perception, all the way through the cognitive domain. And we are testing that at the beginning of the season, and then hopefully at the end of the season, if not at the beginning of the next season.
Right.
Those tests they take a long time for us. So we're very selective in which players we're giving them to. But that is one way we're able to get through you are getting better.
Right. You have benchmarks.
We have.
Yeah. Tommy, any thoughts on this one?
Yeah. There are a few things that I actually want to go back to what we were talking about previously a bit first, which is the sort of the priming and the training component.
Please.
And when you talk about priming, what I think about is it's really arousal management.
Okay.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
And anybody who's done any work in most level of sports will have heard of something called the arousal curve, the Yerkes-Dodson arousal curve, which was actually developed based on studies done in mice in 120 years ago, but they actually translate fairly well over to humans. The idea being that for a complex skill, there's an ideal amount of arousal. It's a bell curve.
Right.
So at a low level of arousal, you're kind of maybe tired, sleepy, detached, disinterested. At high levels of arousal, you're anxious, stressed, sweaty, can't concentrate. Somewhere in between, there's an optimal amount of arousal for the thing you want to perform at. And that level of arousal is different based on the thing that you're performing at.
And the person.
And
right?
and the individual.
Individuality.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I often think about the Olympic final in the 100-meter sprint versus archery.
Mm-hmm.
These are people at the top of their game competing against the best in the world, but you need two very different levels of arousal to do your best at those two different sports.
Right.
So depending on the athlete and depending on the scenario, you may need to decrease arousal. They may get very stressed about performance, so you need to help them calm down.
Right. They come in, they're jittery.
Exactly.
Their breathing is erratic.
Yeah. But often when you're thinking about priming, I think you're essentially you're usually increasing arousal. You'll start to increase engagement. You're probably going to increase heart rate a little bit. You talked about some dopamine, noradrenaline, all these other things.
Mm-hmm.
Acetylcholine, really important for focus and encoding memories. That's where you've opened up the gates to neuroplasticity. And this is why exercise is one of the best ways to improve learning. Is because that's what it does.
Right. It improves arousal.
Yeah. And then the next part is the training part. So if you just prime, then you can go and learn sport-specific skills elsewhere, right? If you're using this to increase arousal. But if you're then trying to train specific cognitive functions, you could still do that in the cognitive training environment.
Right. So
but then
you can segue from arousal to training. Yeah.
But then you're going to have to introduce failure and fatigue and frustration and all these things as you sort of push the boundaries of what you're currently capable of.
Right.
But you don't want to do that before you want to go and perform at something. Right. So it really just kind of depends on what you're doing and what you're trying to do with it. And then I've forgotten what the next question was because I wanted to go back and talk about another thing. What was the next question?
See, now we're going to start the webinar all over again. Yeah. So we were talking, that's a good question. So we were talking about time commitment. We were talking about training. So priming being shorter bouts, training being longer, and those indicators require patience.
Yeah. So it's the indicators that I think for almost everybody, if you want to invest time in some of this stuff, it has to be immediately worthwhile, right? I can't show up to a driver with new kit and get them to do something because everybody's trying to do that. And it's got to immediately seem like it's going to be worthwhile and it's going to have impact. At the same time, it's worth thinking about how you collect the metrics because sometimes that can have an impact on psychology. Right. So I'm thinking about, I was working with a group. This is talking about professional driving at a track in Australia. It just happened that's where the group tended to, they used to have these batak buttons that the drivers would do before they get in the car, which is, it lights up and you have to kind of hit it.
So a reaction board.
It's a reaction board. And they ended up getting rid of it because the drivers hated to see their number before they got in the car, right? Because if you do badly on this thing, then you're like, oh, today's a bad day.
Yeah.
Right. So I think it is important to collect metrics to show that something is working, but you also have to think about how that information then influences the athlete.
Yeah. So off camera, you had asked me, do I look at my Aura, my Whoop, and my Apple data every day? And the answer is no. I use them slightly differently, but I know, and you and I have talked about this, and also with some of our military customers, on very important days, they will say, don't look at your sleep score, right? Because we have now become so hyper-focused on the quality of sleep, and we dig into our data. And then if we wake up in the morning and we see, my sleep data is down, can I psychologically disassociate from that, or now is that going to affect my performance? So again, another one of the challenges here is people always want data. I'm going to do this training session. I want to know how I did. People love scores. They love to see progress, but we also want to make sure that doesn't work against them. Interesting. Let's pivot a little bit because you brought up something, Michael, I wanted to unpack, because Tommy, you and I have also talked about this, the relationship between physical fatigue and cognitive fatigue. And is it always best to load the cognitive training on the front end when someone is fresh, or does it make sense to experiment with the opposite? Let's put them in some physical distress and then add a cognitive stimulus. Tommy, why don't you take this one first?
Sure. So I think that there's 3 parts to this and 3 areas where you can train for different reasons, and it all depends on what you're trying to achieve. I think. It's also worth mentioning that most physical fatigue is actually cognitive,
right?
And because you can manipulate things, that you can manipulate psychology that then people perform differently. So for instance, there are studies where they have people cycle to exhaustion, but they say, if you could make it for an hour, that would be great. And then most people make it to an hour and then they stop. But the scientists have manipulated the clocks
so it's not an hour.
So it's not an hour.
I love scientists.
Yeah,
and their manipulations.
So actually, manipulation of clock time is one of the best ways that we can kind of get into people's heads to figure out like what's true physiology versus what's psychology.
Right.
So a lot of physical fatigue is cognitive, and so I think it depends on what you're trying to do. So
let me jump in. So would it be safe to say, if a lot of physical fatigue is cognitive, would it be safe to say that most people are fatiguing cognitively first? But if we were actually be able to sort of look at their lactate and other blood markers in real time, we would say, no, you still have a lot in the tank.
Yeah. When I rode at college, I remember one of my coaches saying, when you think you're done, I could still electrically stimulate your muscles and they would fire just fine. Like there was kind of an excuse to sort of torture us on
that's a very tender and empathetic way to approach it. Yeah.
But so then it comes down to like, where is the primary, maybe issue is not the right word, but where are you trying to improve performance?
Where you're trying to have the most impact.
Yeah. So like what's the primary limiter of the individual that you're trying to work with, right? So if you're somebody who's older and, processing speed has started to decline, then, static processing speed training while they're just sat on a chair in front of a computer, right? That's going to be great.
Yeah.
If somebody's limitation is their physical performance, right, then you might want to train their physical side separately. Because if you layer on a cognitive component, you'll get less of a physical stimulus because they'll get tired faster, right? If you just want to train their, below the neck. Whereas often, the athletes you're working with, it could be a driver in a car, it could be a soccer player. You want them to maintain cognitive function whilst physically tired.
Right. I mean, ideally, you want to maintain both of those equally for as long as possible.
So then at some time, training them together. Is important, but acknowledging that if you layer a cognitive load on top of a physical load, or you do some kind of cognitive task on top of a physical task, you will do less well at both individually. So it's you're training for a future state where you can then use that capacity that you've improved. So it's just understanding what it is you're trying to achieve in the moment with
being very deliberate. Yeah. So you raise an interesting term, capacity. So is there value in increasing your cognitive capacity? So again, in conversations that I have, I'll be very upfront and say, assume that we can improve the processing speed of your athletes. Assume that we can improve the decision-making speed of your athletes, because we believe we can, and we've seen that, and we know other platforms can do this as well. That doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be a better soccer player, right? Because you still need all the other skills, both mental and physical, that need to be applied at the right time. But are we improving, I'm going to steal one of your terms, are we improving your headroom? Is that valid?
Yeah, I hope I'm going to answer this the right way. I know for us,
If not, you're going to be dismissed from the
yeah,
panel.
be
So
out.
yeah, it's a lot of pressure.
There's the door. Um, we need our players to perform at 90 for 90 minutes. And the way they perform in the first minute cognitively, we need them to be there in the 90th minute. So a lot of ways I can get players to come into the room is we often train 60 to 75 minutes on the field. And there's a lot of breaks inside that, nothing like the game. So the opportunity is to come now into my room and really stretch themselves. Don't know, sometimes I think it is a matter of extending the time as much as it might be improving in this core cognitive skill. We're going to improve attention and focus for the last 15 minutes of the match. Or are we just trying to make sure that the capacity they currently have, they're able to tap it when it really counts toward the end of it? I mean, we hear it all the time on things like set pieces or toward the end of the game where the physical load has been really high. And now the thinking is one of those things that isn't quite there as it was in the first minute. So we're trying to change that dynamic. I would say most of the time the training is meant to stretch rather than, we do try and build.
Yeah, so a little bit of both.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
Yeah, I think that, I have this idea that you mentioned, this idea of headroom, which is the total capacity that you have available to you. And this is easiest to think about physically, right? So your headroom for your leg strength is the difference between what you need to do day to day versus what you're capable of. So it's the difference of how much strength does it take to get up out of a chair versus what's your maximum back squat or leg press in the gym, right? And if you have big headroom there, then you are capable of doing much more when you're under significant stress or under significant pressure, be that physical or psychological. And the brain in many ways seems to be the same. So as we get older, we tend to lose that buffer. So that, have you ever heard that joke where people are like, oh, when I was young, I could learn anything and I could just be driving and everything's going on and it's no problem. And now I have to turn down the radio so I can see in the dark. Right. That's essentially headroom. Right. Yeah. How much additional capacity do you have available to you? And I think that one way that you can build on that is by training certain aspects of cognitive function. And there's actually I think the best example of this comes from the cognitive training literature. There's a study called the ACTIVE study, which is now, I think, almost 30 years old. They randomized nearly 3,000 older individuals to four different groups. There was a control group and there was 3 different cognitive training groups. It was a processing speed group, there was a reasoning group, and there was a memory group. And they trained for 10 weeks. That was it. And then they had refresher sessions at 1 year and 3 years, and they followed them for several years afterwards. And what they found was that the processing speed training group ended up being able to drive. That's why I mentioned driving for many more years than the other groups. They maintained the ability to drive and they had fewer accidents while driving. And this was a big enough study that they could detect some of this stuff. So that's also a very cool example of transfer, right? You did some training on a computer in the 90s. Right. And then
on a 90s computer.
On a 90s computer. Yeah. And then that actually transferred over to, real life improvements in terms of being able to,
that's interesting,
to maintain the necessary skills to do something complex like driving.
Right. Interesting. Okay. All right. So one of the takeaways there, I think very important, is deliberation, right? You don't just want to start throwing in cognitive training and check the box. You want to have specific goals. You want to think about metrics. Some teams are in better positions to capture metrics than others, and the right metrics, because if you measure the wrong things, you'll prove the wrong things. So that's always a difficult part. And then also when you're applying the actual training, thinking about being very deliberate in that. Do we want to start with priming today? Do we then add a cognitive load at the beginning? Because the term that a lot of people will use is cognitive load, and I want to make sure we're using it correctly. That you want people to experience cognitive load because you want their capacity for cognitive load to improve, right? So then thinking about when you apply this tool is equally important. Another example, when people say, well, where is this really useful? To me, I'm going to think of two: return to play. This is a classic example where I can't train physically. And so is it not beneficial at this point to at least be doing cognitive training with the goal of maintaining or even boosting that capacity while I'm going through physical rehab?
The answer is yes, but in my
Okay, it was a loaded question.
I just can talk in my environment. We're pretty clear in my environment that we are working on performance and not rehab. So in my environment, when we have players,
Even when you're hurt.
yeah,
Yeah.
we take the approach of, if player's injured, we'll take equipment out of my room and bring it to the rehab space. I won't be part of that process, but they can work with the individuals on whatever technology or whatever it is to be for return to play. And then the technical side is still there. They still have to show them game film, and they still have to use this to use the opportunity to their advantage. We spoke a little bit about learning to learn, or we run maybe the same language but different words, skill acquisition. And this is something that's a challenge for a lot of the players I work with, is they just, unless they are directed these days, their ability to independently learn and take on these challenges, or the return to play and how to use it to their advantage. Maybe this is a little bit where the psychology comes in when I'm working with them while they're injured and having our one-on-one conversations. This is the time we can do a lot of goal setting and try and
Right.
get them in that self-directed
Right.
area.
Yeah. I think from your question, I think I would step back just to like first principles again, which is that if we think about cognitive functions, physical function, we know that as soon as we remove a stimulus, function declines. That's perfectly normal. Right? The fancy physiology word is allostasis, right? You're matching function to demand because it's a waste of energy to do anything else. So then, yeah, if you're unable to do the physical work that you need to do as an athlete, it would make sense to continue to provide some range of stimuli that are going to keep some aspects of function going, even if it's not exactly what you would ideally do if you were fully fit. So that's how I would certainly think about it. There are also an increasing number of examples from, say, recovery from concussion or traumatic brain injury, particularly in those with persistent symptoms, a month or months later,
right,
where they're using VR, particularly with some physical activity or maybe augmented reality, to layer on some cognitive training on top of physical activity, and those do seem to improve, particularly sort of cognitive and fatigue type side effects. I think because you're starting to apply some stimulus to the tissue and it's starting to improve its function as a result.
I think related to this, it's interesting, is also this challenge, and Michael, again, I'm going to default to you first. You only have a certain amount of time to do physical training with your players, right? And so if we're looking, and for what I understand at both the college and the pro level, that seems to be decreasing. The amount of time we actually have to physically train and work with our players decreases. So, but cognitive training doesn't necessarily follow the same rules. So you can still get, quote unquote, more mental reps, this concept of more mental reps. Does that play?
Yeah, but for us, it does. I mean, we have an excellent sports science department with the Galaxy, and they're closely monitoring players' health to make sure that they're fit on game day. And sometimes the only way to do that is to decrease the amount of time they're actually on the field practicing.
Right.
To the extent that the work that I do keeps their headspace fit, we try and do that. I think that the challenge, I just lost my train of thought.
That never happens.
Never happens
Yeah.
to me.
You need to go prime in the other room, and then you can come back. Yeah.
Right on it.
Yeah. So we're talking about using it as a supplement to physical training and physical load because you don't have as much time with players.
Yeah. I had a really great point on top of that. As soon as
All right, you incubate on it, Tommy. Your thoughts? Like, for instance, the other restriction could be cost. Because I did watch the Formula One movie, and I know it's not cheap to take those cars around a track. And there's a team of people every single time. Now, yes, they have simulators, but then is there also value in getting more reps in and more time just from a cognitive perspective?
So, well, in that specific example, the amount of time on track is hugely restricted in Formula One. It's very tightly regulated. And yes, there are simulators of different levels depending on whether drivers are at the factory or they often have setups at home. In that setting, I would say that often what a driver needs more of is rest and recovery than additional stimulus. But it's all going to depend on who the athlete is, what the sport is, what their total load is, how long they have to adapt, what they're adapting to. So yes, there are absolutely scenarios where I think there's only so much physical work that you can do.
Right.
Therefore, having some additional training time to focus specifically on cognitive training is absolutely going to be beneficial. But there are going to be others where it's just another thing that they have to do that's taking away from their ability to truly recover, both physically and cognitively. So it's always going to be a balance.
I think that raises another great point again to this whole metric world of what's my recovery, what's my readiness score. I think it's important physically, but equally or even more important cognitively, right? That if we aren't getting the right volume of sleep and the right quality of sleep, that all of this additional activity has less benefit. We won't say no benefit, but less benefit. Is that accurate?
We were talking in the green room.
In the green room.
Yeah. Just about this topic about flight after game and the stress and the load and everything that comes along with leaving and getting on a flight and then being in LA around 2 a.m. or whatever it might be. My sense is we have weeks where we're in the middle of summer. We're off of, say, 3 away games or something like that. We're not asking the players to come in after training. It is really about recovery of having them as fresh as they can on the very next day. Myself, asking them to come in 2 or 3 times a week for 20 to 30 minutes after a training session, that's not going to necessarily help the long-term thing. So we do have these week-to-week kind of sense of it's time to rest and just focus inside of these things. That I do recall.
Oh, here it comes. Everybody, tune in.
It's great.
Put your phones down. Here it comes.
In terms of the reps.
Yeah.
When they're working in NeuroTrainer in this one aspect and several of the other tools, I can, and I feel like we're working on a specific cognitive skill, say split attention or focus, concentration, whatever it might be.
Okay.
And that is specific to the application that they're in a tool. We have found benefit to providing the players other tools that are immersive, say in VR, where they're actually put in a soccer environment. And whether it's in that VR playing the game that they just played on the weekend, or whether it's just a scenario-based VR program where they're having to make decisions, they're having to attend to their teammates, opponents on the field. Adding in that element has been very positive for the way AR plays. So that immersive feeling of their craft, of being inside their craft and doing it, and not just say working on their vision or their speed of thinking. That was the
Got it.
point to the reps. There's reps that go after, I think, specific cognitive skills.
Right.
And there's
And then
the
there's
immersive part, video.
they can be closer to the sport.
That's right.
Yeah. The use of both. Right.
That's been important for us, especially in when we're trying to not overstress them or bring them to a point where when they get to Saturday, they're just feeling exhausted.
Sure. Okay, so I'm keeping track of time. We had a little bit of a false start, so we're going to go a little bit over, but a couple more points before we open it up for Q&A. So those of you who have questions, if you haven't posted them yet, if you go to the public chat and you go to Q&A, by all means, please load those questions and we'll curate them shortly. Pitfalls. I want to do this. I want to start implementing cognitive training. What are mistakes that people make? Don't do this. It's a waste of your time. Michael's already smiling. He's got a. Oh no, yeah, no, you don't have an answer.
I know for me, what was super important was having a battery of tests independent of any of the tools that I was using.
Okay.
That to provide to the front office, to provide to people to say, look, the training is paying off. You might only see them in tests because you may appreciate this player more or less. That's a opinion and a judgment call, and that's difficult for us to get through. Games are so complex. But I think first and foremost, as simple or as complex as you like to make them. I was looking at a sheet of paper at one point. We were using 9 different platforms for testing, and it amounted to like 14 different tests. That's super complex and maybe not necessary, but there are very simple tests that you can do out there that, if you are starting there with the baseline, and then you come up with a schedule, maybe 3 months or at the end of the season, we've chosen to do end of season.
You retest, yeah.
I think that's an important thing to look forward to.
I think it's a very important point, and when I'm talking to potential new partners, I will often ask them, because they're going to say, how do we know we're going to see a benefit? One of the first questions I always ask is, what are you measuring now?
Yeah.
Because what you're measuring now is already indoctrinated into your system rather than introducing something new. Now, I like to understand what you're measuring now, because sometimes it will have no relationship to cognitive, and therefore it's not going to be a good measuring stick. But I think that's a really important point, that if you're not measuring anything and you now add another training stimulus, whatever it is, whether it's cognitive or even if it's physical, how are you going to know that you're seeing a benefit if you don't have something to look at over time?
Yeah.
I was thinking about different approaches depending on whether you're talking sort of an institution or an individual.
Yeah.
So yeah, if this is institutional, absolutely, I think it's very important that you think about what metrics you're going to track, particularly because depending on the size of the institution, there's going to be a financial cost,
right?
But there's also going to be an opportunity cost,
a time cost.
Yeah, sort of how much time we spend doing this rather than something else.
Yep.
Right. And that's really the trade-off that everybody's going to have to make at this point.
Always.
Right? Like you said, nobody's got an hour a day just to like hang around and try some stuff out. I would also track metrics around, like we talked about confidence and belief and that kind of stuff, because there's probably going to be an element of that. Like, how prepared do you feel to do whatever it is that you do? And then afterwards, like, has that changed? Because there's probably going to be some placebo effect here, and that's probably a good thing.
Yeah,
right. That's okay.
And that's what I always say at the end of the day. Who cares? Like, I understand. I say it somewhat flippantly. Who cares?
Yeah.
But if whatever tool you're using makes your players consistently more confident and consistently more ready, then it has value, even if you can't necessarily reverse engineer the science. And that's just the inevitability of human performance, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. And then the sort of like from an individual side, if you're just like an individual, you're thinking about trying some of these things, I think the main pitfall is that there are a lot of things that are kind of sold as cognitive training.
Yes.
And this is one reason why cognitive training has such like a sort of a storied history where neuroscientists sort of yell at each other about whether it does or doesn't work.
Right. That comes soon. We're going to yell. The yelling comes really soon.
And it's probably because often the skill is too niche, too specific. It's doesn't really transfer over to anything else. Cognitive training on your phone probably is never going to be enough of a challenge compared to like fully immersive auditory, visual, physical stimuli, which is how the brain is used to learning.
Right.
Like Sudoku and crosswords aren't cognitive training as much as people have been told that they are, right? So
this just in case you're not listening.
Sorry to tell you. So I think that there's an increasing body of literature to support different platforms, kind of in different scenarios. Certainly, youth athletes, there's a fair amount. That's probably where some of the evidence is best. And then in older adults, there's some good evidence. There's some good evidence there. So really trying to focus on platforms that are that give you like a truly diverse and challenging stimuli that have some evidence so far that they improve some of the things that you want to improve. I think that's going to be important for like the individual who's trying some of these things out.
Yeah, so I agree, and obviously a very near and dear topic. Safe to say, if you're going to be using a tool and you're going to call it cognitive training, and it's really easy, something's gone wrong, right? Right. If you because coming back to this whole concept of cognitive load, if you are not accruing cognitive load, either in the short term, long term, or some combination of the two, or you don't have the ability to adjust that. So there may be days where you don't want a lot of cognitive load, but you still want to get reps, but you need the ability to make it hard. And if it's not difficult, challenging, ideally multi-dimensional, multi-sensory, that is the way the brain loves to process, and that is better. Yeah. Okay.
In terms of do's and don'ts, I just had one more that I think is somewhat important, and because it comes into the financial piece as well, is the scalability of what you're using.
Sure.
So I'm a department of one. May have said that. I'll say that a dozen times because that's the truth.
How many people are in your department, Michael?
Just myself and interns when we do get them, and being able to give them one-on-one attention for an exercise, etc. You can get. I can buy 10 touchscreen TVs, or I can buy 20 VR headsets and load software onto them. So thinking about how you schedule and how players in a team environment, how they go through your system has been super important.
Logistics.
In my days with Toronto, we were very hands-on, but we just couldn't get to all the players. You just couldn't get to them.
Right.
So finding tools where you could scale, where you get a lot of players in a short period of time coming through has been a change with the Galaxy that's been super, super positive.
That implies also that the tool doesn't require a lot of proctoring, right?
Yeah.
You need to be able to get to a point where it's self-serve if it's really going to scale.
Yeah.
Right. And not a lot of setup time and all these other things.
There's nothing better for me than having a one-on-one in my office. And then when I'm done with the one-on-one and I walk out and there's 7 guys in VR headsets going.
Yeah.
Or we have a couple of touch screens too. So they're going, they're active. But if I have to sit there and keep on working on the breakdowns, but then also what exercise you're doing and all that, it becomes onerous.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I do think, gentlemen, do we have some questions in the queue? We do. All right. Let's take a look at some of these. Stand by. Yeah, you may have to read them. Give an example of a cognitive training exercise. Okay, we're going to do a non-neuro trainer example of a cognitive training exercise, to be fair. So I'm going to reframe that question. I'm going to say, I'm not going to buy any new equipment. What can I do with what I have right now in the average athletic training studio?
Lord, you have so many. And then when you have to get specific, I think one of the things that's important is what are you trying to get out of the activity? So what I see a lot, mistaking of cognitive exercises, you're going to be working, say, on agility, and you're going to throw a tennis ball in there and say a number, or I don't know what the thing. Cognitive training you should be looking at something very core, like reaction time. So a typical thing for me is we use a lot of tennis balls, colored tennis balls. I might throw something, say red, orange, or blue, and whatever hits the floor first, then they have to go find the right tennis ball that's bouncing around the room. We have 3, maybe the goalkeepers are throwing the balls. That We use strobe glasses quite a bit, along with ping pong balls. So our goalkeepers love to save ping pong balls while they're wearing these strobe glasses, where their visual system is being challenged.
Right.
And then they're sometimes we're trying to really get some focus attention and really look at some visual acuity. So bingo balls with numbers on them, where they're trying to really identify the number on the ping pong ball while it's being shot at. A lot of speed and reaction type exercises inside our space. We're so it's unfortunate in the sense, but we are so technology driven, and really neurotrainer is one of those prime components that we use, along with another system that's up on our big screens that work more on visual perception and vision, and speed and reaction. So, but we've had to be technology based, because for me to be in the room doing these things is a little bit difficult for us to do.
Well, I think also, so we all have seen variations of the ball drills, right? The colored balls, the ping pong balls, and all these. First of all, does that pass the cognitive training test for you?
Yeah, I think so, as long as the challenge is high enough, right? And I think that's the main thing. That
Yeah, if you're having too much fun, the challenge probably isn't hard enough, right?
It should be at least intermittently frustrating. That's how you know
I
that
haven't
that's
met
hard
a
enough.
set of goalkeepers that can't make a session fun like this.
So another question popped up for a moment about tools, and I think it's very relevant. A lot of organizations can't use 14 batteries of tests. What are some sort of off the shelf? We may have an answer, we may not. Off the shelf, simple tools. It's going to be a hard one to answer because it's going to be very sport specific, isn't it? But any tools, metric tools that you really default to, that you think are universally applicable?
So I think if you're right, so some tools will allow you to both test and train, and then it kind of, if that's your only metric, then you're kind of cheating the system, because we know you'll get better at the thing that you're training at, right? But having so if we're thinking about some like more core cognitive functions, then there are lots of platforms where you can do batteries of formal cognitive function tests,
Right.
Stroop tests, tests of working memory, paired associated learning as a measure of hippocampal function. So like those kinds of things. So there's lots of platforms out there that do that.
Now, a lot of them are computer based. Yeah.
Almost all of them are computer based. And some of them require like a physical computer. You would have to come into like a lab or a clinic setting.
Harder to scale.
Others others you can just do it at home on your desktop.
Right.
And there's usually some kind of barrier to entry. You have to pay a subscription, pay per user, that kind of stuff. But so those are kind of the more formal tests. Other things, so like specific programs that have some evidence for them, where you can do some kind of assessment. So Soma is one that is a cognitive training specifically for athletes. You can do it on an iPad. You can do it on your phone, but I think iPads are better. They have they've been involved in a lot of like brain endurance training. So you're layering cognitive tasks on top of some kind of physical exercise, and you would do something like a Stroop test whilst you're on a treadmill. So
and just for those who don't know what a Stroop test is.
Yeah, so a Stroop test is a word flashes up, it spells a color, and it is colored.
Right.
And then depending on the scenario, you have to like respond based
either
on
match or mismatch.
Yeah. But the color of the word spells, or the color of the word is. Right. That's like a classic.
Right.
It's a very classic cognitive test, and you can use it to train as well. Then there are certainly some drivers, particularly junior drivers who we've worked with, who've enjoyed something called NeuroTracker. Again, you can do it on a like a desktop or TV type screen. You have to wear 3D glasses to do it. It's multiple object tracking. They have some evidence for improving driving skills.
Okay.
So if you're not going to buy a VR headset or anything else, then the final thing I'll mention is a platform called Brain HQ. It's probably the cognitive training platform that has the most evidence for it. It's been used in the most studies, hundreds at this point. when I mentioned the active study earlier, the processing speed task that they did is now in Brain HQ. It's one of their tasks called double decision, where you have to like focus on something centrally, but then also process things that kind of appear on the periphery. So those are some of the platforms that have some of the, outside of having to buy a new headset and that kind of stuff
applicability
that you can do on a desktop or something like that.
Right. Okay. A question came through that I think was neurotrainer specific. Do we have an assessment tool, and is it generalized or is it specific to the platform? And it is specific to the platform, so that our whole approach and our philosophy is we're going to measure what we believe we can impact. So that doesn't is that gaming the system? No, because we're completely clear about it, right? We're very transparent that if you do a neuroscore assessment, we are capturing data that we feel very confident we can improve over time. But in addition to that, we always encourage, what else do you measure? Because we never want, whatever the platform is, if your training and your measurement and your success metrics are all within platform, that is too specific. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we look for more generalization. Okay. I know the team is working here. If technically and financially unconstrained, what's your ideal cognitive training exercise would look like, and why would you design that? Oh, this one's going to Tommy. You're off the hook, Michael. You have Elon Musk money and unlimited time.
I think that it's going to depend. It's going to depend a little bit. But ideally, it's as close to how humans process information as possible, right? So that includes like visual inputs, auditory inputs. It might include processing auditory information and then having to speak in response. It might include some kind of physical movement, because like that's really when, like every system is being tasked, and that you can sort of like push all those capabilities, but it's completely safe, right? So
and adaptive,
right? So as you get as like on a good day, it pushes you harder. Yep. On a bad day, it throttles back. So,
and it compliments you. All the time.
It tells you how great you look.
Yeah. So your confidence goes up.
So it's probably going to be, so it could be in VR, but like full 3D like screens, would maybe be better.
Yeah. And because again, you're not tethered by money or practicality at this point, right?
Exactly. And then it's going to be, and then you're going to have to layer on two different questions. One is, do I want this to be specific to the thing that I'm trying to get better at?
Right. Or do we want it to be generalized?
Yeah. So then if you want it to be very specific, you want it to train just that thing. So you don't want to be constrained by other aspects of performance. And what I mean by that is, if you're trying to train processing speed, you don't want your motor skills to be the constraint.
Right.
But if you're trying to build broad, like full body capacity, then like all those things are going to be required. And it's going to, if you can bring in very fine motor skills plus processing speed, plus you're having to process information and like speak. And so there are some tasks that are done, I know, in some military settings where there's some kind of response inhibition task, deciding what to shoot or not.
Right.
But at the same time, you have to respond to information from somebody else.
Oh, sure.
Or they're doing the task and there's a cognitive load on you, and you have to process information for them so they can
provide them with the information. Or an example would be a combat pilot who is flying, targeting, and receiving information from 5 different auditory channels and having to cycle through.
Exactly.
So basically Ready Player One is yes. Okay. All right. We'll take 2 more questions. So one was very, very specific. Is juggling a cognitive skill? And if so, what are you training?
So you're
going to quote a paper.
I'm going to quote a paper.
All right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So one of the first papers ever to show that in adults you could increase the size of a part of the brain was a study with juggling. It's published in Nature in the early 2000s. And they had individuals, and they showed them they taught them how to juggle a 3-ball cascade, just like a standard 3-ball juggling maneuver.
Right.
And then after 3 months, they saw that particularly some aspects of the visual motor cortex had increased in size.
Wow.
On an MRI scan. And then when they stopped,
it atrophied.
It atrophied, right? So you're matching function to like demand. And so then juggling, more than being a pure motor skill, is about coordinating motor movements based on visual inputs. Right. So that's the cognitive skill that it trains.
So interesting. It raises another point, which is this whole question of stickiness. So, and I don't know that we'll dig into it that much today, but one of the questions that often surfaces is, okay, somebody does cognitive training for a while, then they stop. How long do the benefits last, or do the benefits wear off? My answer to that is always, you don't have to continue the exact cognitive training you're doing, but the cognitive training coupled with the activity that you're doing, if you continue to maintain the activity, you probably maintain pretty good signal. Does that pass the sniff test?
Anecdotally, in my environment, the players who stopped for whatever reason, again, there's a bias probably on my part that they're with me and their performance seems to trend positive. Whether or not they stay there,
whether they plateau or
right. That's always the question. And it'd be naive for me to say,
right.
It's because they're no longer doing it.
Right. But they're still playing soccer.
They're still playing soccer at a high level.
Right. So if you're improving your visual processing, but you continue to do visual processing in your sport, then there's reason to believe you're going to maintain that new level. Yes.
This is always the challenge. You're working with me in the lab, in the department. And if we do a test, pre and post, and we see an increase, was there increase in the test because of what they're doing with me in the lab, or was it just being on the field?
Right. Doing something else, or do they sleep better? Yeah.
I think it's a piece of both.
Yeah.
I think we are priming it. I think we're getting it ready. I think we're putting on extra at the end, but to say it was one or the other would
it's
not
hard.
Be, wouldn't be the way.
Okay. All right. Do we have one final question, gentlemen? Nope, we're good. All right. So, thank you both. Great conversation. I apologize to those who joined us that we had a staggered start there in the beginning, but we got to all the important points. As we wrap up, Michael, people want to follow up and they have follow-up questions or conversations for you. Best way to reach you, if you're receptive to that?
You would just send those questions to Noah. Noah will forward them on to me. I'm not a social platform guy, so.
All right, fair enough. I'm happy to serve that role.
That's the way it goes.
All right. Tommy?
A couple of different places. Instagram is probably where I'm most active on social media, at Dr. Tommy Wood. I have a Substack and podcast that I do with a close friend and colleague of mine who's a neurologist, Dr. Josh Tucknett. The URL for that is betterbrain.fitness. And you can sign up for the free version, and everything that we do
it's good.
It's free.
Yeah.
And then I have a website, drtommywood.com.
drtommywood.com. And you have a book coming out.
At the end of March, The Stimulated Mind comes out. It's about improving cognitive function and minimizing the long-term risk of dementia.
Yeah. And you were kind enough to give me a preview copy, and I read it cover to cover. And I have to say, I've been in this space now as a non-scientist, but as a professional for several years. And I think it's probably the most comprehensive work that I've come across, and a very good combination of theory, practice, and humanity. A lot of your humanity shows up, which was a great read. You can reach me through my email, noah@neurotrainer.com. This will also be broadcast on my podcast, Focus Matters, and you can reach me through that vehicle at noah@focusmatters.live. I want to thank those that dialed in and joined us. I want to thank you both. This is the first of many, so we're going to continue to expand this conversation, not just to the cognitive domain, but this larger domain of brain training. So we'll bring in mental skills, hopefully bring in some mindfulness. It's a complex world. I think that's something we all have to embrace. And it's something that really comes out of your book is, I want to come back to that point, which is we know that if you physically add stress, controlled stress to the body responds. And that's why we're living longer. That's why exercise is so powerful. It's so intuitive that the brain is the same. Some of that is cognitive training and some of it is not. Some of it's just cognitive stimulation and maintaining a very, very vigorous mind. So I encourage everybody to explore Tommy's work. And if you want to talk to Michael, reach out to me. Good luck to the galaxy. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining. Thank you all for dialing in.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.